Well, the subject of history in Australian universities, we touched on this earlier when we were talking about the failures in our education system, was once a study of the past. That's what history used to be all about, studying the past. Now, after experiencing a sharp decline, it has become dominated by leftist dogma, by gender theory and critical race theory. Joining us now to discuss exactly what universities are teaching your kids and your grandkids is the director of the Foundations of Western Civilization project at the Institute of Public Affairs, Dr. Bella de Brera. Bella, great to see you as always. Now, the IPA and yourself in particular have undertaken this research. You looked at what's happening in our universities, and I love this. You found things, for example, that race as opposed to democracy. Race was the subject of 86 subjects compared to only 33 for democracy. Identity rather than enlightenment, 64 to identity, 25 to enlightenment. Sexuality as opposed to reformation, 54 to sexuality, only 17 to reformation, and so on and so on. Tell us about this study, why you undertook it, and what was kind of the worst things you discovered, Bella.
Well, how much time do we have? So I looked at, myself and a colleague read through 791 subjects that are taught across 35 universities in Australia, all offering history as a Bachelor of Arts. And we found, horrifyingly, that history is now dead as a discipline. So history has been replaced by postmodernist theory, so gender theory, critical race theory, queer theory. You know, whatever theory you can imagine has replaced the study of the past, which is, it's no longer fashionable just to look at the canon of Western civilization. That has been jettisoned, and it has been replaced by this focus on race and gender and social justice. And what historians have done is that they've recast themselves as sociologists. They're not really interested in looking at the past. They're interested in making a statement about what's happening today through a very, very narrow lens of this identity politics.
And what worries me here is these are the historians of the future. So what are they going to be teaching future generations about what really happened here? Because it's all about activism and ideology as opposed to the truth, facts, things that are verifiable.
Well, yes, look, as I said, it's not fashionable anymore. And the problem is they're losing that knowledge. My fear is that we're losing the knowledge of the past. And what happens to a society when our collective memory is erased? We can't recognise the signs of totalitarianism. We can't recognise when our freedoms are being taken away from us, when our personal sovereignty is threatened, because we don't know anything about the past. We don't know what happened 10 years ago.
But not only that, Bella, I mean, you know, you look at this and it's not just about really injecting race and gender identity and all this postmodern nonsense into the curriculum. To me, this is part of a much bigger project on the left to delegitimize Australia and to delegitimize the West as something that is inherently flawed, sinful, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, all the other phobias in the world, to eventually foment some sort of revolution, quietly or not so much, to create some leftist utopia. I mean, really, this is a Marxist project, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's a critique of Western civilization. So the irony is, postmodernism says that you can't learn anything from the past, so forget it. But they're still obsessed with looking at Western civilization and the history of Western civilization through this lens in order to destroy it, because they have to prove that everything about our civilization is responsible for the inequality and all the problems that our societies face. So they do have a project to decolonise Western civilization.
So give us some examples. Give us some examples, Bella, of the sort of slightly unnerving things you discovered in these courses.
So, look, critical race theory is something that we've seen playing out in the US, and it's a major voting issue for parents being taught to children. It's now creeping into the subjects here. There is this idea that Australia is fundamentally racist. They've just taken holus bolus the idea that America is racist, and they've just transferred it to the Australian setting. So children, well, not children, but teenagers and children are actually being taught that Australia is fundamentally racist and irredeemably so, and therefore, not worth defending, not worth being told that actually it's a country that
Well, it then becomes illegitimate, and if it then becomes illegitimate, all its laws become illegitimate, as do all its property rights, ownership, everything about that society becomes illegitimate and therefore is ripe to be replaced by some kind of, whatever it might be, utopian version of the left, one based on Indigenous affairs would be one way of going, and we've seen in New Zealand how that is, they've got this idea of co-governance, where suddenly the enlightened, Western Enlightenment, Western democracy is kind of sits alongside something else. Do we face that danger here if we go down the route of the voice, for example? Isn't that just embedding this notion?
Well, yes. I mean, the second most common theme after gender in these subjects is Indigenous history and Indigenous issues. And that is pushed, and that is, there is a sense to, there is a push to delegitimise Australia as a nation. That was invaded in 1788 and then focus on the...
Invaded in 1788 by Captain Cook, who was long dead.
Yes. Planted the flag and talked about being coloniser. I mean, they can't even get their history right.
Well, that's what I'm concerned about. There is this great focus on Indigenous history, like you said, but is it a full picture of the Indigenous history? Is it a full picture of some of the conflicts that took place, the treatment of women, all the full depth of what we know, or is it a very much a sanitised version?
Well, at university, if you're talking about schools or university, because they're two different things.
Well,
tell us both.
So, well, at schools, the national curriculum pushes Indigenous knowledge and history as the main something that we should all aspire to. So at the moment, history is being taught to children as a very sanitised version. So on the one hand, they're taught that in 1788 Captain Cook invaded, killed all the natives and planted the flag. And then on the other hand, they're told that actually the only legitimate people. The only people who have any legitimate claim on Australia is Indigenous Australia. But so there's a lot going on here, and it really is trying to dismantle the modern state of Australia.
Well, it is trying to dismantle that, but it's also, isn't, Bella, trying to essentially keep us in a perpetual state of year zero, where the past is this sort of, murky, dark, horrible stuff that happened back then, and essentially then what you're talking about doing is turning students not into historians, but activists who will then always be trying to foment change against the dark, bad stuff that happened yesterday and the past. And of course, even today's present will look terrible by tomorrow's standards.
Well, I mean, look, the activist thing is a major problem. And I've been through every subject in the national curriculum, and this is another discussion altogether. But there are so many examples of children being turned into activists in the national curriculum in every single subject that I had to stop using examples. It was 4 pages of examples. French classes, Japanese classes, Chinese language, health and physical education, history, English, mathematics, science, everything.
But it's always anti-West activists. They're never, OK, let's be activists against FGM in Muslim majority countries. Let's not be
hijabs.
Well, exactly. Let's be activists against modesty culture in Islam and what impact that has on women. You said that, they see the world through this lens of every inequality we have is because of racial inequalities and misogyny and bigotry. But how do they reconcile that with the fact that the West, for whatever its faults, is the most equal, equitable part of the world? I mean, you look at some parts of the world and you have absolutely zero chance, depending on your skin colour, your caste, your sexuality, your gender, of ever succeeding. So how did they reconcile those two things?
Well, you're making the mistake of looking at facts and being reasonable.
Come on, Rita. Get your act together,
You obviously haven't spent enough time in academia.
But we're talking about university here. We're talking about higher learning. We're talking about, graduate degrees. And are you saying even there's just this willful ignorance of the world?
That's where it begins. That's where it's all starting. This is where it's all coming from.
It's terrifying. Now, just quickly before we wrap up, well done for identifying the problem. I think many parents and grandparents would be shaking their head and going, well, this explains why whoever at lunch the other day was banging on about what...
what I would have liked to have this sort of chatter? I don't know, maybe some coalition MPs, federal or state.
Matthew Guy, that's exactly.
That would have been handy for parents and mothers in particular.
That would have been very handy. We've seen in the States, as you alluded to, Bella, the fact that parents can fight back in the American system through the school boards, and they have great success in doing that. But just very quickly, Bella, what is the solution? What needs to be done? Well,
at university level, first of all, the universities need to be honest about what they're selling So when they talk about these subjects as being history, that's completely false advertising. So if you're going to keep these
defund
subjects...
them. If they're not teaching history, defund the history department.
No one's ever going to defund a university. But if you're going to keep if you're going to insist on teaching these things, move them into sociology or abolish them altogether. Bring back history. Bring back study of what actually happened 200 or 300 years ago in the and put these things where they belong, which is probably in the rubbish bin, but I probably shouldn't say that on television.
Do we have
but I just did.
A very rich benefactor who left money so we could study Western history? And what happened to the Ramsay Centre?
They're
What
great
happened
books.
there?
That's great books. That's more of a focus on literature and philosophy rather than history. So there is the only decent history degree in Australia is Campion. But look, if you want to teach history, just go and read the history books. There's still really decent history being written. It's totally cut off from what's going on in
But for
academia.
how long? That's what worries me.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the next set of history books?
There will always be history books because there's always the archives and there's always people who are genuinely
But no,
interested
who's going to document
Who's going to
our
want to do
history
it?
now?
Exactly.
That's what I'm
a very good
talking.
point.
That's